So recently, someone I know ran into an issue that maybe you've had or wondered about yourself, and that is they got busy with some life things that came up and their domain was close to expiring, and then when GoDaddy was sending them the email notices warning them about that, they thought it was spam and they didn't really pay a lot of attention to those emails, and next thing they know, their site went down. But they didn't notice it until the domain had been expired long enough that it had actually been bought up by somebody else, and so just lost entirely. And so the question from that arises, what kind of impact does lapsing my domain have on my SEO for my website? So I wanted to delve into a few things that come from my experience just doing this for 13 years or so. I want to preface this briefly by saying that in some cases, anecdotal experience does not align with the official thing that Google might say on the blog and things, but experience is what experience is. So the first thing, maybe the most obvious, is it will break your ranking momentum. And what that means is just, it's nice to have continuity with new content coming out, with new things that your site is doing. If your site has been around for many years, there's a certain degree of rapport and solidarity that your site has, and for it suddenly to go down breaks some of that momentum. And it also can lead to a loss of trust. As we've talked about in other videos, a huge ranking factor today that Google is always looking at is what is going to be a good experience for the user. And in the past, we've talked about how that comes down to design and the flow of the content and things like that. But in this case, being up consistently, being a resource that people can count on is important. Now, it's okay if your site goes down briefly. I mean, that happens with hosting, as long as it comes back up same day, within a few hours, etc., and that it's not going down too often, or else that can start to hurt you. But when your site is down for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, as Google crawls it repeatedly, and each time it sees it is like, whoop, yep, it's still down, it's going to reach a point where it might take the site straight out of the index, because it's looking at it like, this doesn't seem to be a temporary blip, this seems to be this site is no more. I'm not going to offer a site like this as a solution to people, because nobody wants to click something out of the search results that leads nowhere and then they have to click back. Google doesn't want that, and so at the very least it will seriously diminish your rankings because your site is not reliable anymore, and like I said, at worst you'll get pulled straight out of the index because Google will assume you're not even a website anymore. This obviously can have a negative impact on your Google local listing as well, since the local listing and the website, when they're connected, do have a bearing on each other, and it's hard for Google to take your local listing seriously if it's seeing that for weeks or months on end your website has been down, especially if the local listing is still referencing your website address, because that just makes it look disjointed. It makes it look like you're not on top of your stuff, and same issue. Google is like, do I want to start showing this local listing for this business when it's not even clear to me if they're still in business or if they even know what's happening with their website, and your rankings for that will plummet as well. If you can repurchase your domain again and get it back up before somebody else snags it, like happened in the case I was talking about, you can overcome some of this, but you might run into where Google treats the site as a new website. If the domain has been down long enough that it's pulled it out of the index, you're essentially now asking Google, please re-index my site, please look at it. It may see the site and say, oh yeah, I remember this stuff, I'll consider it at least to a degree the way that I did before. But it might see the site now, as it's re-indexing it again, as a brand new website. And as we've talked about in other videos, trust comes from being around a while. It's much harder to rank a brand new domain than it is a domain that's been around for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so if Google is looking at your website as a new domain, you have to rebuild that trust factor all over again, which can be very discouraging if you put a lot of effort into your website marketing and now your site is basically starting over. And this is even more so if you're in the position that this person I'm talking about was in, where their domain actually got bought up, and now to relaunch their site they have to actually use a different domain, then quite literally it is a new domain, and they're up against that. In some rare cases, now I don't know if this happens as often anymore because of the way Google is always evolving. I haven't seen this for a few years, but I did see a case years ago where something along these lines happened, and when they changed the domain of the site to something different, at first, they had a very hard time getting Google to pay attention to the content on their site because it still had the old site, the old domain indexed, and it recognized that content that they had used before. And then it was noticing, hey, there's that same content on this new site. I see this as a duplicate of that site. I'm not going to take this content seriously because it's plagiarizing that other site, even though that's not what was happening. And so this new site was being ignored for a while, and we had to do a few different things to really pull this one out of the index and get Google to recognize that this one was the new de facto website. And so long term, it ended up okay, but in some cases, since we're talking about this, it's important to note that you can run into that issue as well. And so, as you can probably see through this list of things, this can be pretty devastating to your SEO if you let your domain lapse. It can ruin all of the work that you'd put into the site and essentially make you have to start over. And it can be even worse than that because of what I said in the beginning about it damages your trust and your credibility with Google. Sometimes Google has a grudge that it doesn't let go of for a while. And so if your site is back up and you have this impression in Google's eyes of not being reliable, it can take a while to kind of regain that trust. In the same way in personal relationships, for people, if you lie to a friend or you betray them in some way or you really hurt them, maybe you give a sincere apology and they're willing to forgive you and they're willing to be friends again, but it's kind of weird between you for a while and it's clear to you it's going to take some time for me to mend this entirely and be fully back in favor with this person. Same idea with Google. And so you're fighting an uphill battle at that point. So anyway, hope that was helpful for you guys. If this was, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me stay inspired to keep creating content like this and answering questions. And of course, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or you can visit my website and shoot them through the contact form. And that helps fuel the new content that I'm creating. I'd be happy to do a video talking about whatever your question is if it's something that I have the knowledge to answer. Thanks guys, see you next time.